Good evening all and welcome. Tonight's stories are especially juicy. So if you are more inclined to sleep through the stories, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but your mind might just stay awake with how captivating they are. Let's find out. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Alaska is the perfect place if you want to get away from the rest of the world. As America's least densely populated state, you have plenty of breathing room from any kind of authority or praying eyes that may want to know what you're up to. For this reason, my home state is very attractive to all sorts of weird and unsavory groups. I've stumbled upon Scientology centers at the end of a dirt back road with nothing else for miles around, and heard stories from doomsayers prepping who claim to have bunkers made out of shipping containers on the sides of mountains. I've met people who have come out of religious cults in the interior and want to keep their followers away from any contact with the outside world. All of this and more you can find in cheery Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, the only big city in the state. Growing up, we had about 250,000 people in a city, and it takes about half an hour tops to drive across it, so that gives you an idea for what we up north consider a big city. The only other real city in the state is Fairbanks. These two cities are connected by 360 miles of a 2-lane highway. It's a 7-hour drive one way to get between them, through one of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet. Mountains rise up on either side of you between Anchorage and Denali National Park before you drive through these colossal canyons carved out of rock over tens of thousands of years by molten glaciers and rivers. Past Denali is another 3 hours of driving through a vast, flat interior plain with mountains in the distance. I say all this to help you understand just how desolate it feels in Alaska, even on the highway. After you get out of Anchorage or Fairbanks, there is nothing but wilderness as far as the eye can see, save for the occasional small town with a max population of about 1,000 on a good day. 10 years back, it was even less. Alaskan girls are built tough. We change tires, hunt, fish, camp, and generally have a great appreciation for the outdoors that women in the lower 48s don't really have if they're near a city. The joke is that Anchorage is the biggest rural city in the country. All this brings context to the following story. In high school, things were different, or at least they felt different. I was a young and stupid woman who thought I could conquer anything due to the aforementioned built tough attitude I was raised with. Senior year of high school, I decided to treat myself to a camping trip into the mountains up past Talkeetna. Nothing fancy, just an overnight or two trip in the most beautiful state at the most beautiful time of year, mid-June. Going up north in peak summer here has a weird feeling to it. The sun never really sets. If you've ever seen the movie Midsummer, that's what it's like. It gets to about dusk, and that's it. It's still bright and sunny out the whole night. Shout out to listeners in the far north of Scandinavia and Greenland. The false sense of security I had, thinking that the midnight sunlight would mean safety, probably nearly got me killed or worse. My second mistake was not telling anyone where I was going. I just packed up for my trip, stopped at Subway for lunch, and headed out to the great beyond. The drive was fine. A solid 2.5 hours of driving north along the highway took up most of the afternoon, as I jammed out to the greatest hits from the radio on Cool 97.3. After you get through the Matsu Valley, you get into the mountains again. Tall spruce and evergreen trees line the roads on both sides, with the occasional empty space where there has been some clear-cut logging. All of this gives you a sense that while you're out in the wilderness, you're still connected to civilization in some way. This led to my biggest mistake: not staying at a state park campground. I was in high school with only a part-time job and did not want to pay the $15 overnight camping fee and was too scared to risk the fine. So I found a spot that looked good and pulled off the road. The map I got from my dad said there was an old mining site up a nearby mountain, so I decided that would be the best spot to head for an overnight. My logic must have been that it was badass to spend a night in a mining ghost town. I pulled off the road, packed up my backpack, put on some bug spray and grabbed my map and compass and started off into the woods. Now, this hadn't been the first time I'd done this. I had been on wilderness backpacking trips on my own with my dad throughout my childhood. I knew my orientation skills and had taken some wilderness survival courses at camp. I wasn't just some dumb blonde wandering off into the woods with no idea of where I was, or so I thought. A solid 45-minute hike up into the hills, and I finally made it to where the old mining camp was supposed to be. There was nothing there, just an old concrete foundation with some holes in it and nothing else. I was very disappointed, but unsurprised at the outcome. I set up camp in the woods and set to build a fire for dinner on the concrete slab. Here you're supposed to set up cooking away from your camp, just in case bears are nosy. Last thing you want is a 1,300-pound grizzly bear poking his nose in your tent wondering why you smell like Campbell soup and s'mores. By this time it was getting late, around 10 p.m, but the sun was still high in the sky, and by the time dinner was over it was nearly 11. I was starving and dug in. About an hour later it was about dark, and I was going to get hunkered down in my tent for the night, confident that the overgrowth was private enough for whatever animals might come out around then. I woke up to voices in the distance and slow-moving crashes through the underbrush. My first thought was hunters. My dad and I had run into a few on some campouts, so it wasn't uncommon. I relaxed and figured they would just pass through without incident and closed my eyes. That's when they found my fire pit. A man's voice cried out into the brightish forest, "Who the hell's camping on my property?" I froze. I knew I had messed up, and was getting up and grabbing my purse and putting on my shoes so that I could go apologize before I heard a man say again, "When we find you, you're dead. You're on private militia property and trespassers get shot." That's when the whole situation changed. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just unpack my tent and stuff with armed guys lurking around. I carefully put on my shoes, put my keys on my purse and slunk away into the underbrush as quietly as I could. My thought was to slip away until they got bored and left, then go back, pack up and leave. I spent 20 minutes hunkered behind a log in the woods, barely in earshot, before I heard a second voice calling for the others. They had found my tent and were tearing it apart, going through my stuff. I heard one shout out, "Bed's still warm, trespassers a chick, she left her underwear." The first man shouted, "Okay, fan out and find her. She thinks she can trespass, then she's gonna have hell to pay." At that point, I wasn't concerned I had left my spare change of underwear in my bag or that the creeps had found it. I needed to get out of there. Quietly, I made my way down the mountain for a good half hour, tiptoeing and taking care not to step on a twig or make a ruckus. After the rustling and shouting of the men had faded quite a bit, I said screw it and booked it as fast as I could into the midnight sun down the hill. I tripped and fell and got scraped more times than I care to remember. Finally, I made it back to the road, but much to my terror there was no car. I knew I had come out, up or down the road from where I had been. I couldn't quite remember where I was at the time, but I picked a direction and started walking. I rounded a corner on the road and saw my car, and the two men standing beside it. They were armed and dressed in surplus military gear. I hid in the brush on the side of the road and watched. A while later, more men appeared from the trail I had taken. They dumped all my stuff next to my car, hopped back on their ATVs and drove off. I went up to my car, careful not to be seen, and found a note on my dashboard. It read something like, "If we ever catch you on our property again, we won't hesitate to use force. Consider this a warning. I went back to start loading stuff in the car and noticed what they had done. They'd cut up or destroyed all my gear, probably as punishment for trespassing. Honestly, I'm thankful they did that because I'm grateful I did not get shot. Ever since then, I have taken great care to camp only in the designated camping areas. To the weird Alaskan militia group, I know you probably weren't going to end my life, but nevertheless, let's not meet again. My uncle lives in Russia and has done for more than 2 decades. From time to time I used to travel there for holidays since early childhood. He lived in a rural area not too far from the city of Moscow. He held a small farm, cows, pigs, chicken and such. I was 19 when I went to Uncle for the summer breaks, since I was old enough to help him around the place and I had a driving license. Uncle asked me to get into a truck and take hay back to farms from the plot of land that he used to grow and ready hay for the winter. He had to keep feeding 2 cows, and without hay, it would almost be impossible to keep cattle for the winter. I'd have to make a few trips to drive all stacks of hay from the plot to home, but as a motivation, Uncle promised to let me borrow his car for a night out with friends. We had made a deal, and the first trip came and went without any incidents. It wasn't a big distance between the plot and the farm, maybe 25 to 27 kilometers, but loading and unloading the truck took a long time, so by the second trip it was already well past sunset. I was driving a truck back to the farm, full of another load of hay, when suddenly on the road appeared a man. He was smiling and holding up a 1,000 ruble bill in the hopes of catching a ride. You ever get the feeling when something is out of place but you can't quite put your finger on it? I had that weird feeling and decided to play safe and fair. I didn't stop and continued on my journey back to the farm of my uncle. I felt a bit guilty for leaving that man there, but in my defense, I was a 19-year-old girl driving a car that wasn't even mine and loaded with tons of hay, which costs quite a lot of money. I didn't want to risk not only getting hijacked, but also something worse. With such thoughts, I calmed my conscience and in a few minutes forgot the encounter entirely. Not much after that, I heard a weird noise coming from the backside of the truck. Something was hitting against the truck bed door, and I got scared that I might have thrown all the hay without knowing it. I stopped the can and got out, looked back, checked the doors and latches, crawled under, but everything seemed fine. I shrugged it off and returned to the cabin, and was about to open the door and get inside when I saw the old man sitting in the cabin of the truck, smiling at me, holding out the bill of 1,000 ruble. I didn't even hear how he opened the closed doors. I almost fell back from sheer shock. How the hell? When? Why? I had thousands of questions lining up in my head. How this dude got here? How he caught up? Why is he sitting in my uncle's truck? I yelled at him to get the hell out of the truck, but the old man was just sitting there smiling and holding out the damned bill. I yelled, threatened, but nothing. And standing there outside my truck, holding the doorknob of the driver's side, I realized that I'm scared to death of that man. Luckily for me, I saw the lights of another truck coming my way. I leaned out, holding myself with the doorknob, and began waving my hand. While the truck was getting closer, I was thinking to myself that I'd give this creepy old dude the ride of his life with that bill far up his guts. The truck was almost there, and I decided to look into the cabin of my truck, and I saw he had now scooted out the driver's seat, face stuck to the window, and was staring at me. I fell off and landed my ass from fright. Then I heard the door of my truck open from the passenger side and the scrambling of feet. The dude walked over and he was still smiling and holding out the bill. Only then had I noticed what he held in his other hand, a small kitchen hatchet. This wasn't fun and games anymore. I backed away, and just in a moment, the truck arrived and stopped right beside me, and the man that stopped before me turned and dashed into the forest away from the road. The driver of the other truck looked over and asked what was wrong. I just yelled there was a man with a 1,000 ruble bill and a kitchen hatchet. Dude didn't even get out. He locked his doors and ordered me to do the same. Jumping back into my truck, I locked the doors and waited a while for the other driver. What we were waiting for, I don't know. Maybe to see him again, wait to see if he'd turn up. But 10 minutes went by and the driver of the other truck decided it was probably safe enough that we get out of the cars. We got out, shook hands, lit cigarettes, and I told him what happened from the beginning while we smoked like crazy. The driver, Ilya, how I later found this out, just nodded along and looked around, seemingly looking for movement from the other side of the forest. Butting cigarettes, he advised me to never stop the car no matter what, and especially if going at night. He was a long-haul driver and seemingly speaking from experience, so I agreed, bid him good night, and we went into our own separate vehicles and parted ways. When I got to the farm, I informed my aunt about what happened, and as I expected, she started freaking out, called my uncle immediately and explained everything, and soon enough, the neighbor boy that was helping all day unload the truck here in the farm took keys and drove back to my uncle himself. And to be honest, I was happy that he relieved me of the duty. I was thinking all night about how that guy caught up with me. I wasn't speeding but wasn't crawling either. My only guess was that he ran after the truck and somehow jumped to the back door and held up for a while and then started to make noise so I'd stop and investigate, which is exactly what happened. Why he was doing all this I can only guess. I never met the man since, and to this day I have no idea what that was all about, or what would have happened. Thankfully, I didn't have a chance to find out. Thank you, Ilya, for an amazing time, and as for the old man with his stupid bill and hatchet, let's never meet again. This was about 4 to 5 years ago, around Thanksgiving. I was a senior in high school at the time, and I had a girlfriend that I frequently visited. She lived in the boonies around a small town called Winona, with a population of 162. Now before I start, I'll go ahead and say this is very much in the middle of nowhere. This is Courage the Cowardly Dog country, except with a few hills and random forest clusters. Another thing to add is that there have been mutterings from locals of seeing very strange things out there. But anyway, here goes. It was almost midnight, and my folks were pretty cool with me staying out as long as I said where I was going and planned on being back. I had a 45-minute drive on a very quiet, lonely little highway back to my hometown, so I started off, and normally I drove a little over the speed limit, but not too dangerously. I was alone, and that road always creeped me out. I just always wanted to get the hell home. There was not too much for lunar lights on this night, and stars had pretty low visibility, so I knew this was not some sort of odd celestial phenomenon. The road goes through the draw where water used to flow a long time ago. The road basically dips up and down after a time. I go down it, and I'm listening to the talking head on my phone on pretty low volume. As I start to take the incline, a light shines on my car. It's sort of a white-greeny, and it's not coming from in front of me, like an oncoming car, or from behind me, but rather directly above me. The incline steeps more, and I look right up at this bizarre light. I'll try and describe it as best I can. There was a solid ring-shaped dull white light that appeared to be large enough to fit a Tahoo or something inside of it. In the center of this ring was a light that was shining directly on me, as if it were a spotlight. Its color was a sort of white-green. This whole enigmatic thing was maybe 50 feet above me. I got a look at it for what felt like 4 to 5 seconds until I said, "What the hell is that?" Then this thing promptly took a sharp trajectory up, then sort of flashed away. I was beyond terrified that I drove at 110 miles an hour back home. I was in a Camaro, and didn't sleep much that night at all. I also swear on my mother's grave I saw this same flying object a year later when I went to visit my best friend, who lives about 20 miles away from civilization in the boonies. This time I was driving out to his house to hang out and drink and stuff and chat about college. It was around 9:30 p.m. and I had just made it out past the last houses I would see for a while until I reached my friends. As I'm driving, I look over to my left and see the same light show in the sky, except it's not on me but above a tree line. I could barely see an outline of this thing, but I could tell the lights were on the bottom side. I said, "Well, hello again," to myself as the hairs on my neck stood up. My unexplained flying light show then promptly did the same maneuver it did the first time, up and out, and completely vanished. Now I'm unsure of what I saw. It still freaks me out to think about it, but I know it happened, and I know I saw the same thing twice. I hope it doesn't happen a third. I went on a little hiking trip with my dad to Shasta, California, a small town in Northern California near the Oregon border. Shasta is home to a potentially active volcano, named of course, Mount Shasta. There are many trails on Mount Shasta, so my father and I were excited to do some hiking. We drove up to the side of the mountain to the parking lot in which one of the trails begins. I believe it was called the Old Ski Bowl Trail. The landscape was a very barren incline filled with rocks, boulders, dirt, and very few trees. About an hour into the trail, we came across a very odd assembly of these large boulders. They were arranged in a circle. We thought it was strange, but we continued on. If you look up pictures of the trail, you'll see much smaller rocks arranged in patterns and circles. My father and I only encountered 3 people. At least, that's what they appeared to be at first. The first 2 were a father and son. We met them on a steep incline that went along the wall of a cliff that would then switch back as it reached the top of the cliff. We stopped and said hello, talked about the trail, and then went our separate ways. Here's where it gets weird. Dad and I kept walking up the incline for about 2 minutes. I turned around and saw the father and son so far down the trail. It should have taken them at least 20 minutes to get down to where they were, but somehow they were there in about 2 minutes. To this day, I have absolutely no idea how that could have happened. There was no one else on the trail at that point, and I could see the color of their clothes from the distance, so I knew it was them. I pointed it out to my dad. We thought it was weird, but tried not to dwell on it and carried on going. But things get weirder still. As we reached the top of the cliff, there was another strange rock arrangement that was off to the side of the trail. This time there were far more rocks than before, and they were now arranged in rows almost like gravestones. We continued on the trail and reached another sort of incline with a switchback to reach the top of another cliff. We reached a point where we would need climbing gear to continue, so we decided to head back. When we turned around, I saw a man standing among the rocks staring at us. He was wearing a button-up shirt, cargo shorts, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. He was at a distance where I should have been able to make out his facial features, but it was almost as if he had none, like his face was just flesh and skin. I pointed it out to my dad, and then the man quickly ducked down behind a large boulder and was peering out at us over the top of the boulder. It seemed almost playful, like a child trying to hide. For a few moments I was out of it and had no recollection of what was going on. According to my dad, I just started walking towards the man in the hat. My dad just started calling out to me, "Josh, Joshua, what are you doing? Where are you going?" Then I came to it, and I was standing right at the edge of a cliff. It was a huge drop, enough to end my life or seriously injure me. My dad grabbed me and pulled me back to the trail. He told me to stay put, and my dad went down to the boulders to search for the man, but he wasn't there. He had disappeared. There was nowhere for him to go except up or down the trail. It didn't make any sense. He simply vanished. I have no idea what was going on that trail. I have no explanation for it. I've told this story many times to family and friends, and no one has an explanation. I have done research though, and found similar stories about encounters with a man with no facial features wearing a hat. I've also read that the Native American tribes from the area viewed Mount Shasta as a holy site. They believe it could act as a portal to other dimensions, and that it's guarded by spirits who would potentially harm anyone who tried to go up to the volcano. If anyone has had any similar experiences or any insight at all, I would love to hear it, so please share anything you have to offer. Me and my friend and my girlfriend were staying on top of a small mountain in a yurt in Northern Carolina for 3 days. The yurt was one large cylindrical room with 2 futons and a kitchen table. 2 doors to enter the yurt off a porch that circled one half of the building. The first door was to the north, and the second door to the west. The second door was closer to the futons, and the main entrance was on the north from the futons. The first night we made dinner and fell asleep after a 9-hour drive. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. We went out hiking in the morning and had a full day with lots of fun. We came back and I made dinner and we passed out. That night, my girlfriend woke up and had an extreme and sudden notion that the doors needed to be locked. She got up and locked the door and went back to sleep. She claims she woke up again in a sleepy daze to what looked like a black silhouette sitting at the dinner table next to the bed, and shook it off as a dream or a sleepy hallucination and went back to sleep. We went out again on our 3rd day hiking and returned at sundown. I wanted to take a time lapse of the sun retreating over the mountains, so I ran up to the top of our little hill to set up a time lapse aimed down at the yurt. As I was doing this, my girlfriend and other friends were exploring a trail that led back into the woods of the mountain. We all went back in, and I left the camera shooting. I made dinner and we ate. After, I went up to the top of the hill to retrieve my camera alone. This is where things started for me. I took a wee by my tripod, and as soon as I finished, this wave of what I can only explain as energy enveloped me. I, all of a sudden, had this image in my mind of something behind me in the woods slowly approaching, like a wall of fog. In my mind, the image of a strange white figure that could have been like a humanoid tree, kneeling by the ground and standing up, then sitting only to repeat this multiple times. I know this was just in my head, but it's like I could pinpoint where this idea was, so I grabbed my stuff and went in for the night. We all fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I awoke to a huge bang on wood that sounded like the north door being hit. I was very tired and looked around, and neither my girlfriend or my friend on the futon 5 feet away were awake. I shrug it off and fall asleep. I continued to have dreams as if my vision was just floating inside the yurt, slowly panning along the inner wall, looking outside the windows for hours, like I was standing in the yurt walking around, but I had no body and there was no sound of me walking. Then I awake to a huge bang at the other side of the door. Since my body was oriented towards it, I opened my eyes and was immediately fixated at the door, which had 4 glass windows with a shade. I watched intently, looking to see, but there was no movement. In my head I said, "Nope," shut my eyes and went back to bed. Hours pass, and I wake up a 3rd time. This time I was on my side and didn't open my eyes. To my horror, I can hear a voice just outside. It was sort of an inflection, more than words. It spoke in the way a person might speak to another. I had this notion that there were 2 of whatever it was, looking in as to say, "Look, you can see them right there." I was petrified and I looked really quick at the clock, which read 5:30 a.m. Once again I said, "Forget that," and fell back asleep. When we woke up, I said to my friend, "I don't want to alarm you, but I was hearing some messed up stuff last night." Both my friend and girlfriend said that they had also heard loud bangs. The weird thing is, when each of us heard the noise and woke up, we had seen all the others were asleep. I don't know why, but I think I annoyed something on top of the mountain. I go hunting in northern Canada, and the thing is, where I hunt for deer there are plenty of wolves, bears and the sort, so I stay in a cabin up there. You aren't always on your toes, but you want to bring a rifle with you anywhere you go, even if you don't plan on shooting anything. It's 5 a.m, I'm on the four-wheeler in freezing weather, and I want to get to my tree stand before dawn hits, and I swear to God I keep hearing crashing through the bushes. I dismiss it for probably being ice cracking the branches from last night's snow, but creepy nonetheless. As I reach my stand, I climb up and settle in for the morning. I get a pretty nice view of a field that was cleared out, and there's an old burnt-out cottage on the opposite side of the clearing. As the sun rises behind my stand, the morning is very still, just the occasional branch falling down through the forest. Day really passed without any ammo being spent, and I get out of my tree stand and decide maybe I should go look at the burnt-down cabin. I've never bothered checking it, and looking at it all day got me curious enough to have a peek. There wasn't a cleared trail, obviously, so I'd have to go on foot. I unloaded my rifle and went for a long walk. Around a good 10 minutes later, I started to get close and could see some old farm equipment, which made sense. A field in the middle of the forest was probably cleared, so a farmer could do what he wants with it. I came close to the doorway, only to realize that I had the crunch of snow underneath my feet. The doorway managed to survive whatever happened there, and slid down the snow through the doorway, careful not to touch anything. And I feel a crunch under my boots that definitely isn't snow. It's the skull of a bull. I look up from the snow and there's more of them, skulls and legs, a ridiculous amount. But the part that alarmed me was that I could see a tint of red in the snow underneath one of them that was still covered in skin. I said forget that, backed across the field and didn't look back. Why was someone collecting that stuff in the middle of a forest? I don't know, and I don't want to think about it. Next year I moved my stand and I never want to go back there. Weird stuff happens in the forest. This incident happened to me when I was younger, probably around 19 to 20. I'm 27 going on 28 now. I used to drive around the countryside for hours on end, sometimes up to 6 hours, and smoke cigarettes while listening to music and just daydreaming. I had been through a lot, so this was my way of letting off steam and trying to digest all the badness that had happened to me in the past 7 years. There's a route that goes into the southern part of my state and eventually takes you to Maryland. If I'm not mistaken, it can take you all the way to Florida. It was a road I was very fond of, as it intersected with a lot of interesting places. It could take you to cities and beaches alike, all while somehow remaining pretty isolated and rural. On one of these day trips I was driving through a heavily wooded area that opened up to a field lined with trees on my left. I was pretty zoned out at this point, but something on the side of the road immediately caught my attention. In fact, it even seemed that time slowed down so that I could see this apparition with more vivid detail than any random artifact I would ever glance at lying off the roadside. What I saw was an older, balding man, dressed in full Catholic priest garb. His mouth was open in what appeared to be grief, staring up at the sky through large glasses. He was standing in front of a dead deer, a buck from what I recall. It was around 3 points, maybe 4. Behind the deer was a 1970s to 80s Crown Vic style police car with its lights on. It had no markings to signify what county it was from, and no one was in the vehicle. I don't even think it had the engine running. Now this is pure speculation, but it almost appeared as if the vehicle had been parked there for a day or so because it was so sedentary. The other odd thing about the vehicle is that it had no damage on its front end to show that it was responsible for hitting the deer. nor did this deer seem at all mangled or bloodied. Taking a step back and rehashing the scene as a whole, it had the appearance of being staged or a setup somehow, as if it were all props in a play or movie. Every part of it was so odd and still. For the speed I was travelling at, the glance I cast on the spectacle could only have lasted for about 3 seconds max, but the moment seemed to be quadruple that amount, and its impression was so dense it grabbed every part of my being and seemed to cut through me like a knife. Just like bad news, real bad news. I was gasping for air and almost crying. Had I seen some sort of ghost? Was it a warning from a deity unaware to me? Did the forces that shaped time and space momentarily flex in this rural corner of Virginia, and I just so happened to be its only witness? Even passing the same spot on my return from this trip, there was no other trace of it that remained. Not even the body of the deer or tire tracks from the police car that could be seen. Like a breeze, a waking dream had crossed my vision. A thing so out of place, it could not be surrounded by any setting native to its own themes. I had no answer to any of these questions, only a lack of closure leaving its scar upon my brain for the rest of my life. I used to work as an alligator hunting guide for trophy hunters during my summers south of New Orleans, spending sun-ups and sundowns deep in the heart of the Cajun swamp territory. It definitely let me see some weird and creepy stuff. The first one that comes to mind is when I saw what my hunting partner at the time calls the loup-garou. I personally would have called it a chupacabra, but that's because I'm a native of the southwest, not the south. We were riding through an area deep in swamp looking for signs of big gators. The banks were on both sides of the boat, and there was barely enough water for us to push up ahead, but those mud boats are impressive and can practically run on dry land, so onwards we pressed. Suddenly I saw a grey flash in the trees out of the corner of my eye. It made me nervous. Swamp deer are small and shy. There aren't many mammals that want to hang out in thick undergrowth and knee-deep in mud, with gators hidden there. I tapped my partner on the shoulder to catch his attention over the sound of the motor and pointed in the direction of the flash. He cut the motor and asked if it was a gator slide. I shook my head and said I had no idea, but I saw something. As we were looking around, the creature I saw stepped out from the trees. It was big, on all fours with mottled grey skin. Its movements were janky and jerky, and had a canine-like face, and it locked eyes with me, and I felt sick to my stomach. My partner immediately struck the motorboat up, and we reversed out of there as quickly as we could. My irrational brain said, poor creature with mange, either a massive coyote or maybe a wild dog, but my primal monkey brain was screeching, monster, run or die. It was definitely a freaky experience, even knowing what it probably was. I work in quite a remote area. We were wrapping up for the day in northern Canada. I'm fueling up the side boom. I'm all by myself at this point, because I was tired of listening to the labourers whine of the cold, so I told them I would take care of the rest. Think bulldozer with no blade, but a giant metal broom on the side that we use to raise and lower pipes. It's February, and of course that means it's pitch black. That's when I keep hearing some weird sounds. I can't quite hear it because the pump is too loud, so I search around a few times and see nothing. I get in the truck and take off and drive past the front of the side boom to see a cougar sitting on top of a dirt pile 15 feet away. The damn thing was just watching me there, and probably could have ended me without me even realizing it. I've never seen a cougar in the wild before, and it's hard to understand just how big they are, and just how powerful, until you see one up close. The thing leaped off this 6-foot pile, and probably didn't touch the ground for at least 15 to 20 feet. It's terrifying to think something so big and powerful could just be sitting there, deciding if they wanted to make you dinner. I live on a ranch off a quiet dirt road. Our distant neighbours, the nearest house is about a mile away as the crow flies, have had issues with people stealing things out of their outbuilding and storage sheds in the area. It was also late in the year, so it was starting to get dark at around 6 p.m. As a result, every time I would see headlights go down our road, I would watch to make sure they weren't stopping on the property. One evening I see a vehicle going very slowly down the road and come to a stop at the end of our driveway, about 120 yards from our front porch. The vehicle is parked right in front of a 60s pickup I have parked, so I think whoever it is might be looking to steal it, or just look over the property. Whatever the case, I decide to put on a black coat, grab my rifle and go investigate. It's dark out, so I stay out of the headlights of the vehicle so I can get close. I can tell it's a white van, but I don't see anything else distinguishing about the van. When I'm about 50 yards away from the van, it backs up and turns into our driveway. It freezes as the headlights wash across me standing in the middle of my driveway. Then I see the reflective FedEx logos on the side of the van. Needless to say, the driver probably crapped himself as he suddenly sees a dark figure standing in the middle of a field in the dark holding a rifle. Surprisingly, after I try and give a friendly wave and smile, he continues up the driveway to the house, and I get to explain the situation and we both have a laugh. So that's how I got to be the creepy guy in some FedEx driver's story. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed tonight's stories. I certainly enjoyed narrating them, and what do you know? No technical trouble. I thought I'd give this computer one more shot, and I haven't bought a new machine, and I think it was the right thing to do. For now, Dell. If you enjoyed today's stories, you know what you should do about it. That's right, not going to tell you. If there's a story of something strange or creepy that has happened to you, feel free to submit it in the various places mentioned in the description. That's the best thing to do. And if you usually fall asleep to the stories and just found them too good to resist, there are, of course, over 1,000 other videos to watch. So go nuts and pass out. Alright then, for now it's time for me to sign off, and for you to return to Slumberland. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.